we may be missing the point. While Trump is trying to strangle Beijing, China is quietly buying up Russian oil via northern routes. And in real time, it's training its AI models on U.S. military movements via satellite. Trump is simply revealing all the routes and protocols of U.S. military operations to China like a free TV series. Let's take a broader look at what's happening. Why is this a wonderful gift to Beijing? We'll break down the top 5 lessons China has already learned from this war, why U.S. modern military doctrines are officially dead, and how this Middle Eastern conflict is about to trigger a global inflation shock. The number of tankers stuck in the Strait of Hormuz is estimated at 984, representing approximately 22% of the global tanker fleet. Supply contracts are being signed between 3 and 6 months in advance, meaning the real consequences have not yet even begun. Now, zoom out. What exactly is the plan? I've spent over a decade analyzing conflicts, energy markets, and the slow-motion chess games that great powers play with each other's economies. And I'm telling you, what I'm seeing unfold right now is not strategy. It's improvisation dressed up in press conferences. It is a double down on insanity. If you think about it, Iran, which for decades was the most sanctioned country in the world, against which the U.S. is now using force, once the most powerful army in the world, and Iran has not fallen. There is no regime change. Iran has raised prices all over the world. Iran is at a standstill. Was this the plan? Here's what makes it worse. The Pentagon knew. For 3 decades, under Bush, Obama, Biden, the military establishment vigorously fought back against Israeli pressure to go to war with Iran. In 2024 alone, the Israelis tried twice to trap Biden into a direct confrontation. Once in April, again in October. Biden refused both times. General Kane, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reportedly warned President Trump before February 28th that the United States did not have a viable military option. Trump ignored him. Netanyahu told the president what he wanted to hear. The regime is fragile. One hard blow and it crumbles, just like Venezuela. And Trump, not exactly surrounded by wise advisors, as one analyst put it, took the bait. China isn't afraid. There is a narrative circulating in Washington think tanks, on cable news, and across social media since the first bombs fell. It goes like this. The United States takes out Venezuela's oil exports to China. Punch 1. Then it takes out Iran. Punch 2. China's economy collapses. America wins. Game over. It's a neat story. It fits on a bumper sticker. And it is dangerously, catastrophically wrong. Let me give you the numbers because numbers don't care about narratives. China has achieved an energy self-sufficiency rate of 84%. That means for every unit of energy China consumes, only 16% comes from abroad. And that number has been climbing for 2 decades. Not by accident, but by design. Massive investment in solar, wind, electric, dams, nuclear power, and the largest electric vehicle fleet on the planet. China's electricity production dwarfs that of the United States, where the grid has been essentially stagnant for 30 years. This is a 20-year project. They set out in the year 2000 to dominate electric vehicles. They began scaling renewable energy before most Western governments had even written a policy paper. And now their renewable energy production matches their coal output. Within that remaining 16% of imported energy, oil makes up about 59% of China's total oil imports. Roughly 17% comes from Iran, averaging between 1.38 and 1.61 million barrels per day across 2024 and 2025. Run those numbers through, and you arrive at a figure that should make every architect of this war lose sleep. China depends on Iranian energy for approximately 1.5% of its total energy consumption. 1.5%. That's what we launched a war over. But here's what the strategists in Washington either don't know or refuse to acknowledge. China doesn't just import oil through conventional channels. Beijing has constructed a shadow fleet of tankers, representing roughly 18% of total global tanker capacity, operating entirely outside standard regulatory frameworks. These vessels reflag mid-voyage, rename themselves, disable their AIS transponders, and conduct ship tow, ship transfers in obscured waters off Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam to rebrand Iranian crude as Malaysian or Omani before it enters Chinese customs data. Since 2022, Chinese customs has reported 0 direct oil imports from Iran. Analytical firms tracking tanker movements confirm over 1.38 million barrels per day still flowing. Current intelligence estimates suggest up to 300 million barrels of unsold oil sitting on shadow tankers right now, a floating strategic petroleum reserve. Combined with onshore reserves estimated at 100 to 115 days of net import cover, Beijing has built a buffer that can absorb months of disruption. Now, here's where the strategy turns from merely wrong into actively self-destructive. Look at who actually depends on the Strait of Hormuz. Japan gets 91% of its oil through that waterway. The Philippines, 94%, 20 million barrels flow through Hormuz daily, and 80% of that volume is destined for Asian market. China also sources 31% of its liquefied natural gas from the Middle East, Qatar, Oman, the UAE. So yes, China has real exposure, but compared to Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, America's own Indo-Pacific allies, that exposure is manageable. Professor John Mershimer at the University of Chicago put it precisely. It's Japan and South Korea that are going to be clobbered. They're more dependent on Gulf oil than the Chinese are. And then he added something that should alarm every European watching this. The Europeans are already in trouble because they're not getting oil and gas the way they used to from Russia. Now, cut off the Middle East flow on top of that, and you can see where the European economies already struggling are going to be in even more trouble. The United States set out to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz against China. What it actually did was conduct an act of friendly fire against every energy-dependent ally it needs for its Pacific strategy and every European economy it claims to be defending. Daily charter rates for tankers carrying Middle Eastern crude to China have soared above $400,000. Brent crude has surged past $92 a barrel, with projections of $150 or higher if the strait remains closed. And Venezuela, that first punch everyone celebrated. According to the South China Morning Post, Venezuelan oil is still being sold to China. The only difference is that the United States is doing the selling now through offshore accounts. The profits changed hands, the oil didn't. Meanwhile, China is accelerating negotiations for the Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline with Russia, using Moscow as a safety valve to offset Middle Eastern volatility. The crisis is catalyzing exactly what Washington feared most: a secure, land-based Eurasian energy bloc between China and Russia, built at the direct expense of the vulnerable Gulf region. America just destabilized. The blockade strategy isn't failing. It already failed. The question is how much damage America inflicts on itself and its friends before someone in the room admits it. Now, let's talk about the war itself. Because even if you set aside the energy calculus, the military picture is sobering. Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th with nearly 900 coordinated airstrikes in just the first 12 hours, B-52 Strat fortresses, stealth fighters, and extensive naval assets. The first 24 to 36 hours cost an estimated $5.2 billion, and a significant portion of that was spent striking decoys. Let that sink in. Precision-guided munitions, each costing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, launched at targets that turned out to be elaborate fakes. The Iranians had prepared. They had moved, dispersed, hidden, and planted dummy targets across the country. The United States fired first, verified second, and discovered it had punched air. The battle of decoys. That's what analysts are quietly calling it. The decapitation strikes partially succeeded. The supreme leader was killed. But here's the critical thing that the architects of this war failed to understand. A point that Mershimer has made with devastating clarity. The historical record is unequivocal. There is no example in modern warfare of an air campaign alone producing regime change. Not in Korea, where we firebombed the North into rubble and they didn't quit. Not in Vietnam, where we bombed for years and lost. Not even in Japan, where we firebombed Tokyo on a single night in March 1945, killing more people than at either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and then worked our way down a list of major cities. The Japanese didn't surrender until August, and most historians attribute that to the Soviet ground invasion of Manchuria, not the atomic bombs. You want regime change in Iran? You need boots on the ground. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq with 93 million people. And even Donald Trump is smart enough to know that sending an army into Iran would be a prescription for disaster. So we're stuck with air power alone. The one tool that history tells us without exception does not achieve what we're asking it to achieve. Meanwhile, the Iranians are fighting smart. A friend of mine in the defense industry described an Iranian drone recently. Sheet metal, cheap as hell, but effective. These things cost thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands, and the U.S. is firing multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to shoot them down. That's the exchange rate of this war. Iran has at least $45,000 missiles remaining and perhaps 50,000 to 100,000 drones. The United States started with an estimated 8,000 or 9,000 high-end munitions and has probably burned through at least half. Replenishment takes months. Patriot missiles aren't artillery rounds. You can't surge production overnight. Even General Kane, Trump's own hand-picked chairman, the man who owes his 4th star to this president, reportedly made clear before the war that this was not a viable military option. Every time he's trotted out in front of cameras, according to observers, he doesn't look happy. He respected the Iranian ability to strategize, he understood what was coming, and he was overruled. The Iranians have destroyed over 27 U.S. bases across the Gulf. They've taken out virtually all long-range early warning radars in Israel and across the Arabian Peninsula. The system's designed to give early warning of incoming missile attacks. They're systematically dismantling American military infrastructure using precision strikes guided by China's BEU satellite navigation system, which remained functional even after the United States jammed GPS across the entire theater. The U.S. Navy, with 2 full carrier strike groups deployed, still can't escort commercial traffic through Hormuz. In the 1980s, when America ran a similar convoy operation, it had a 600-ship Navy. Today, 8 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and 3 littoral combat ships. That's it. And here's the feedback loop. Nobody in Washington has reckoned with the rare earth minerals and gallium needed to build replacement missile systems, the semiconductors, the precision components. China controls those supply chains. The country we're trying to weaken controls the materials we need to rebuild the weapons we're burning through to weaken it. China's 2026 military budget rose 7%, specifically designed to exploit this dynamic. Every American interceptor fired over the Persian Gulf is one fewer available for a Taiwan contingency. And as time goes by, the depletion gets worse. It doesn't flatline, and it certainly doesn't increase. It decreases. The Iranians understand this math, and so does Beijing. 5 lessons for Beijing and the one they didn't publish. While America burns munitions and credibility, China is sitting in the world's most consequential classroom. The People's Liberation Army publicly posted 5 lessons drawn from the Iran war publicly. That's not an accident. It's a signal to Washington, to regional powers, and to Taiwan. And what they didn't publish is almost certainly more important than what they did. Lesson 1. Beware the enemy within. The surgical elimination of Iran's leadership was possible through deep human intelligence. Israeli agents embedded inside the country, speaking the language, knowing the customs. They knew where the supreme leader was. They knew the other leaders were meeting in daylight, assuming attacks would come only at night. China looked at that and saw a mirror. Espionage prosecutions in Taiwan have surged from 16 cases in 2021 to 64 in 2024. Beijing is already running that playbook. But it also noted the CIA released a recruiting video targeting disgruntled PLA officers, the ones caught up in Xi Jinping's recent anti-corruption purges. The paranoia this creates in an autocratic system can be weaponized, or it can lead to purges that gut your military competence. Either way, internal security is now as important as air defense. Lesson 2. Diplomacy is a lie. Trump was negotiating with Iran. Reports indicated Iran had agreed to zero uranium stockpiling and full verification days before the bombs fell. He did the same with Maduro. Talks one day, special forces the next. Chinese state media published an editorial stating that diplomacy under Washington is not a forum for sovereign equals, but an instrument of dominant power. A former Chinese military officer said, "Don't assume your adversaries will play by the rules. They may strike without warning, ignoring both the rules of the game and the rules of war." When she meets Trump at the end of this month, whatever warm words are exchanged, this lesson will be sitting at the table between them. Lesson 3. Superior firepower matters. Whatever the moral arguments, hard power determines outcomes. She has been saying this for years. China's defense budget rose 7%. Nuclear-powered carriers, drones, refueling vessels, electronic warfare systems, all accelerating toward 2027 readiness goals. And they noticed something else: the devastating role Israel played in this war. Chinese analysts concluded that China must prevent Japan or the Philippines from becoming what they call the Israel of East Asia, a regional ally capable of being used by Washington as a military staging platform. Lesson 4: the illusion of victory. You can destroy air defenses in the first hour and still not achieve your political objectives. The regime isn't gone. Netanyahu's real goal, as Mearsheimer argues, may not be regime change at all. Qatar's leadership says we're weeks away from an economic disaster. They're warning of $150 oil. They're invoking force majeure clauses to halt production because they've run out of storage. The UAE just shut down the world's largest refinery, not because of a bomb, but because there's nowhere to put the output. 25% of the world's oil is currently offline. 35% of global fertilizer supply, which depends on Gulf petrochemical components, is disrupted. If oil breaks past $150, the chain reaction begins. Knockout clauses in derivatives contracts start triggering. Banks that wrote those contracts discover they can't cover the exposure. It's the insurance analogy.